Hello and welcome to episode 106, AI and ML in Orbit, Neuraspace mission to combat space debris. We have definitely discussed space debris extensively on this podcast, but today we'll be taking a deep dive into Neuraspace and their mission to combat the space debris primarily. And as we know that this is a big issue for the industry, not from the perspective of creating sustainability, but also from a perspective of where we as a humans are going at the moment. It's been a issue with the climate tech, that the fact that not all countries are aligning at the moment, and we are creating a west on this planet. In a similar way, we are also creating a west or kind of debris in the space domain as well. And companies like Neuraspace are helping achieve this goal where we can move towards a sustainability, but also create a sustainable businesses for the future satellite companies. And without any delay, I would like to welcome on board the commercial director of Neuraspace, Thomas. Hi, Thomas. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Omkar, I'm thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much for your precious time. I know it's been quite a busy time in the industry with several of the conferences going on, and quite a lot of events are going on. And I believe space debris and ground station. I don't know why. Uh, we discuss about these things, but still, it doesn't grab as much a spotlight as it should, because both these topics, ground station and space debris, are very important, especially in the current day and age that we are in at the moment, where companies are planning several thousands of satellite of constellations. And with that respect, we don't know the way kind of risk will evolve in the future. So I believe it is very much important to put a spotlight on these topics, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to have you on board and see what all things Neurospace is doing in the industry and how it is helping the overall industry in a way to move towards a sustainability goal. Before taking a deep dive into the topic, can you briefly introduce about yourself and tell us how you basically ended up doing what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, thanks for a fantastic introduction, Omkar. It shows that you're really into the topic, and you're right. I mean, it gets some spotlight. The issue is there, and we are there to address the issue of space debris and collisions in space. So we are Neuraspace. We are a European startup with headquarters in Portugal, but bases in Luxembourg and other European countries. We were founded 4 years ago, and our mission is to make space again a safer operational environment, both for spacecrafts but also for human spaceflight. We do that by mapping and tracking objects in space using our own sensors, but also third-party sensors and data that we buy on the market. Then we fuse this data together in a huge data lake, and we use our AI machine learning model to basically predict collisions 5 days up to 7 days in advance, and then we use that also to suggest to the customers collision avoidance maneuvers in an automatic way. So all to avoid that there's more debris generated by events in space. That's in a
That's
nutshell.
interesting. Absolutely, that's quite interesting. And proceeding ahead with the, I would say, the prime area of the the mission, I would say, using the artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how do AI and ML play a crucial role in predicting potential collisions between satellite and space debris? Because this is a question that I get asked, as a person who have been working in the space industry for more than a decade now, is basically how the satellites get that alert, where you can provide an alert to the satellite operators that something is coming along and you have to move to a different orbit or to a different plane. So can you explain to us regarding this, how this process works and how AI and ML primarily play a crucial role in this process?
Thanks a lot, Omkar, for that question. I mean, it's really AI machine learning is in the heart of Neuraspace and everything we do. So actually, the first people that were hired at Neuraspace were data scientists. So the space people, like you have them, you or me, they only came in later to add the space flavor to what we do. And actually, one of our main investors, he's using AI machine learning for detecting frauds in credit card transactions, but he has a space background, so he thought the models they're using, they can probably be also used for space. So that's what we're doing. So basically, we have various areas where we use AI machine learning in our solution. So the first one is definitely what I mentioned before. We have huge amount of data that they need to process. To with the AI machine learning models helps us to fuse the data and process the data. Also, it helps us with orbit determination and orbit propagation because our machine learning models were trained basically with historical data. We use AI machine learning as well for risk assessment and assessing the collision probability and to automate the collision avoidance. Last but not least, and that's very important for the defense community, we use it for pattern recognition. Pattern in the sense of pattern of behavior. That's a common model that we use. So basically, we observe the satellite for a long time. We use that to train a model, and then we can detect any kind of anomaly. Like, for instance, if you had an anomaly with the satellite's telemetry, with the batteries, with the solar panels, but also if somebody approaches the satellite in a very unusual way. I mean, it's typical gray zone activities in space that you are confronted with now. That is also something we can do with AI, machine learning.
Interesting. And I believe it's such a huge domain. So I believe there has to be some kind of, collaboration or partnership. So can you share some examples of partnership or collaborations with organizations that have enhanced your ability to monitor or mitigate the space debris? Primarily, looking at the aspect of maybe subcontracting some of your technologies, or primarily having some of the partners, because I believe even companies like Airbus and Lockheed Martin also have subcontractors. So in that way, do you have such agreements in place with some of the companies in the industry or even the outside? Because I believe AI and ML is a huge domain, so definitely you can always outsource things from the IT industry. So is there anything
Yeah.
such thing in the place?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's always the thing when you start a business, when you found a startup. I mean, that's the some of the founders, they think they can do it all. I mean, that's also a trend in some of the space companies. But we knew from the beginning that we cannot do it all. We need to rely on partners for certain areas. And the biggest area where we partner with companies is on the data part. We have our own sensors on the ground. So we have two optical telescopes, one in Portugal and one in Chile. That gives us a good view on what objects are there in space. We can do a lot of tracking in various orbits, but that's not all we need. We need a perfect 360-degree picture of space. So that's why we partner with some companies. Just to name a few, there's Demos in Spain. They're providing optical data to us. There's Our Sky in the US providing optical data to us. Also working with radar providers. There's one in Norway called IceCut. But also when it comes to in-space sensors, I mean, we're not gonna, like some of our partners on the market, we're not gonna launch sensors in space, dedicated sensors, but there's already sensors out there. So every little satellite, or every little or small or big satellite has a star tracker on board. So we are trying to leverage on the star tracker data, because the star tracker sees much more than the stars. It sees also objects around the satellites. And when you connect the star tracker data from hundreds or thousands of satellites, you get a very good overview of what is out there. And then for other partnerships, I mean, it's more on the, let's say, on the organizational or the agency kind of partnerships that we rely on, because we can't do everything alone. So one of the things is the ESA Space Debris Zero Debris Charter, which is an initiative of ESA to become debris neutral by 2030. So we are signatory of that charter, and we are promoting it strongly. And there's other organizations where we are part of. We're collaborating with satellite operators and others.
Amazing. And proceeding ahead, I would say, from the satellite operations perspective, how significant is the threat of space debris to current satellite operations, and what consequences could arise from inaction? Because I believe, as I mentioned, in the beginning of the podcast, that there are several thousands of constellations which are going up at the moment, and it's a big threat in the future. And we are not looking at the satellites which can be refueled in the future, the geo satellites, the leo satellites, which are small, they have a less life acceptancy as well. So from that perspective, can you provide us more insights on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. To be honest, I mean, the threat is extremely significant. Just looking at the number of objects. I mean, you mentioned the constellations that are being launched. They're going into the 10,000s, but also the space debris objects that are there. It's huge. So when we look at objects larger than 10 centimeters, we have more than 40,000, but only 37,000 of those are tracked. And if we go at smaller sizes, like smaller than 1 centimeter, I mean, the statistical models predict something like 130 million pieces. They cannot be tracked yet. It's just statistical models. And what we are really concerned about is what we call fragmentation events. So a satellite disintegrates and one object becomes 100 or 1,000 objects, and these fragmentation events, they become more frequent. So sometimes it's voluntary. So people do use anti-satellite weapons to shoot like a missile to the satellite to just see what happens. I mean, the US did that, the Chinese did that, a lot of others did that. But there's also involuntary or accidental fragmentation events. There was just one 6 days ago. You might have heard it about Intelsat 33E. So
Yeah.
that satellite broke up in geo orbit into, some people say 60, some say 80 pieces. The causes are not clear. It could be a malfunction of the propulsion system, the batteries, or it could be an impact of a small meteor or a space debris object. So, in a nutshell, the threat is extreme.
Interesting. I think the Intelsat case is it's a very recent one that happened. I mean, literally last week, I believe. And I
Yeah.
mean, such cases, in future, maybe we can organize one more podcast and where we can discuss such a live case study. How basically companies like Neuraspace can provide solutions to such problems, because I think it's a human nature. Until you don't see things in reality coming into actions, people don't get engaged in that way. So I believe maybe definitely in future we can plan this, where we can take one case study and showcase how your solutions will be able to solve the future problems and possibly avoid such issues as well. It's an interesting case that you mentioned about Intelsat, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe just to add to that, I mean, it's of course it's concerning when objects in space are being threatened, but it's even more concerning when human lives is at threat. I had the chance at one conference to talk to astronaut Matthias Maurer. So he was actually on the International Space Station when when Russia decided to launch an anti-satellite weapon on Cosmos 1408. So they had to put on their spacesuits and get into the evacuation module, and they didn't know what's going to happen. So they were basically flying through a debris cloud of debris, and they didn't know if somebody would hit them. Some particles hit some modules of the ISS, but it wasn't life-threatening then. I mean, no lives were at stake, but they didn't know at that point if people would have been hurt or even killed by this incident. So it's really alarming.
Absolutely. And, again, moving ahead with the satellite operations only, how do you engage with satellite operators and other stakeholders to ensure they benefit from your services in keeping their fleet safe? Especially, as I
Yes.
mentioned, that, if a satellite is passing by and if there is some, kind of a space debris part, or, even a big, huge satellite that is coming and might be a collision. So, how do you send alerts, and what are the kind of key agreements in place where you actually alert them in advance? And basically you can also let us know what is the time frame where you alert the satellite operators. Maybe it's 5 days or 90 days or 45 days, accordingly. Yeah.
Yes, another great question. So, I mean, what we do in terms of engagement with the satellite operators, it starts very early. It starts even before the satellite is launched into space. So, we help them, or we support them during the mission planning phase to pick the right orbit, the perfect orbit for their mission, but also reducing the risk of collision, because some orbits, as you know, I mean, and as the listeners might know, some are more risky and more crowded than other orbits. So, we help them with that. Then a critical phase when you launch a satellite is the LEOP, the launch and early operation phase. So it's basically when your satellite is separated or ejected from the upper stage of the rocket until it's in its final orbit. It's in a transition phase. And it's very difficult for the operator to get accurate positioning data. We call that TLEs, or two-line elements, because usually our customers, they launch on a rideshare with SpaceX and other companies, and then you have like 150 satellites on the same launch. So once they are separated from the upper stage, you have like a cloud of objects drifting apart. And we help like from the first minute to identify the satellites of our customers by using our optical telescopes, the data from third parties, but also correlating it with GNSS data that we get from the customer. Because with that service, they can basically they can do their in-orbit tests sooner, and then they can put the satellite, they can deploy the satellite much earlier than if they wait for the satellite to be officially cataloged by SpaceTrack, because that can take up to 30 days. Then during the normal operations, we do what we call the space traffic management. So basically, assessing the risk of a collision, predicting collisions, and then suggesting collision avoidance maneuver. Then a key part of that is, I mean, you have a collision warning, and then there's
Yes.
usually, I mean, there's either an operator involved and a piece of debris, or there's what is becoming more common is that there's two operators involved. What we have built into our platform is a coordination function, or a chat function. So basically, we automatically open a chat room for the two operators so that they can coordinate, because they know little about each other, so they don't know if the other
Yes.
one has propulsion system, if they can avoid each other, and who moves first. It's a bit like that. That is missing, because how it is done today, there's a sort of like a phone book, so you have maybe an email address, or you have a phone number that you can call, but you're not sure that somebody will answer the phone. So in this way, it is partly automated, and it works actually quite well. In addition to that, we have started talks with SpaceX to take basically their data into our platform, because I mean, you mentioned before, the constellations, one of the biggest out there is Starlink, and many of the conjunction warnings are with Starlink. So to having a communications channel with Starlink is of course key for our software as well. And then as a last part of the lifetime of the satellite, we also support the customers with in the deorbiting phase, so that to make sure that the satellite deorbits in a controlled manner.
Interesting. This is a very interesting fact because I was not aware about this, that you also engage with the satellite operators even before the launch happens. I think this does make sense, so that you can actually guide or consult the satellite operators to put the satellite in such a orbit where you can actually estimate or predict the future risk, and accordingly take the steps. Because I believe if they don't consult you and directly launch the satellite, I think it might become a very tricky to kind of give them the instructions to safely move the satellite to some other orbit in the future. That's an interesting case. I believe a lot of questions were asked to me in the previous podcast, but I think this one answers everything in this case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Omkar. I mean, I mean, what we saw in the past is that customers or companies, they launch a satellite, and then they worried about the collision risk later, and that is slowly changing the mindset of the customers, because they can influence the collision risk already before they launch, and that's where we're trying to help,
Absolutely.
because that's what our expertise is.
Yes. And I think we are at the final part of the episode. So this question is more from, I would say, your company's vision. So you can take the steering in your hand and answer the way you feel it. So what is Neuraspace long-term vision, and how do you see your technologies contributing to a safer and more sustainable environment in space?
Yeah, it's again a brilliant question. So I mean, I'm German, so I like to use car analogies from the car industry. So
Yes.
if you look at your car or my car or anybody in the audience, these cars have usually more intelligent collision avoidance systems built in than multi-million dollar spacecrafts have. And that is something we want to change. So currently we're helping a lot. We're doing some automation on the ground by getting data from the satellite, getting data from our sensors. But what the goal should be, and that's our long-term vision, is that to change that and give to a certain extent the autonomy to the spacecraft itself, because the spacecraft can be aware of its surrounding and if its trajectory and collision risks itself. and then it can take collision avoidance measures itself, a bit like cars are doing it today, a bit like spacecraft airplanes are doing it, but spacecrafts are not, and they have the possibility to do that. Yeah. Also, of course, it requires the satellites to have propulsion on board, and that's what we are advocating to all satellite operators. And it becomes mandatory for some of the ESA missions that you do, but it's still not mandatory at all. So it's a lot of also lobbying work. So if you have propulsion on the satellite, of course, then you can do collision avoidance maneuvers and avoid collisions in space at the end. So that's the two parts that I would see as our long-term visions.
Interesting. So yeah, I believe that covers everything from the basic part of how it started and where you're going. And I believe in the future I'd be really happy to record a few more episodes with you, especially on the live case as I mentioned, because I personally have been hosting several of the webinars, podcast, but having a live demonstration I believe makes a lot of difference, because you really grab the eye of your customers and even the people who are the policymakers. I think it really pushes the policymakers
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
well, when they see this kind of collision happening and the kind of companies which are existing in the market. Because I believe we are at a stage where we cannot say that we don't have the technology to counter it. Even if we don't have, we have the capacity to scale to that level, and make the space even more safer than what it is today. So I hope in the future we see more such innovations coming out of Neuraspace. And thank you very much again for providing such great insights on this episode. I hope to host you again along with your team as well, in the future on this podcast. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Omkar. It was a pleasure to speak to you today.
Absolutely.